The congressional elections of 1916 were crucial to Wheeler. In an effort to elect as many dry candidates to the House as possible, nothing was spared.
We laid down such a barrage as candidates for Congress had never seen before. On election night, the lights burned late at our Washington office. Many hours before the country knew whether the Republicans or Democrats had triumphed, the dry workers throughout the nation were celebrating our victory.
The elections produced a Congress with more dry representatives than ever before. 19 states voted for state prohibition. The most stunning victory was in Ford's city of Detroit. The motor capital became the first major city in America to outlaw the saloon. Suddenly, and almost too late, the liquor industry realized that prohibition was a very real threat to their survival. They rallied and began to fight back against the temperance tide.
Prohibition is a folly which threatens personal liberty. The spirit of these laws is medieval and constantly clashes with the enlightened spirit of our time.
But the brewers and the distillers made a terrible mistake. They failed to unite. The distillers wanted to regulate the saloon. The brewers wanted to make them safe for beer by abolishing whiskey. Beer, they said, was a foodstuff, liquid bread. It made men healthy. And so rather than ally with the rest of the liquor industry, the brewers retreated to their German roots.
The effects of the fanatics are directed primarily against us Germans. German manners and customs and the joviality of the German people are a thorn in the flesh of those gentlemen.
Those gentlemen, including Wheeler, were working hard to keep their congressmen dry. But rallying state votes was a far cry from amending the Constitution. The prohibitionists were up against 150 years of state suspicion of federal laws.
The most difficult business in American government is the amendment of the Constitution, and therefore the requirements for agreement are set extremely high. 2/3 of the Congress must approve an amendment, and then it must be approved by 3/4 of the states. Not a simple majority anywhere along the line. By 1917, when Congress addressed national prohibition, the Constitution had been amended only 17 times in nearly 150 years.
It was the First World War in Europe which proved the turning point. As troops mobilized, so did the Anti-Saloon League, using the patriotic frenzy to their advantage. With the distillers and brewers still at odds, Wheeler played the divide-and-rule game superbly. First, he attacked whiskey and the hard liquor trade as an economic drain on the nation. It was a waste of grain, he said, in time of national emergency. His men in Congress agreed, and they banned the use of grain for the production of distilled spirits. With no grain to make alcohol, the distillers closed down. Now Wheeler had the brewers and saloons in the front line of his dry fire. He pushed Congress to make saloons out of bounds to men in uniform and argued they shouldn't be able to drink overseas either. He encouraged the former baseball star Billy Sunday, a reformed alcoholic, to preach abstinence to the troops. Liquor, he told them, was as evil as the Hun himself. The idea was to kill two birds with one stone. Beer and the Kaiser would be conquered forever. German brewers in America were portrayed as secret agents for the Kaiser, his fist poised above the innocents. The brewers' alleged links to the German army were investigated by the Senate, which horrified men like Adolphus Busch, who had a son at the front and had given $500,000 in Liberty loans to the war effort. But so convincing was the Anti-Saloon League's propaganda machine that any arguments against prohibition showed the brewers to be greedy and immoral. It was perfect timing for Wheeler and his men. In January 1918, Wheeler capitalized on the mood and submitted national prohibition to the vote.
Prohibition became so associated with patriotism, so associated with morality, so associated with protecting women and children and the poor, that to vote against prohibition would be, to be voting against the obviously righteous solution to America's social problems. And so, in some ways, it's not surprising that prohibition did pass, given the kind of rhetoric associated with it, given the sense that it was presented as such a glorious solution to America's social problems. To be against prohibition would be like being against motherhood or the flag.
In 1919, in the euphoria of a victorious war, over 2/3 of Congress voted to ban alcohol. Prohibition, the 18th Amendment, was now part of the United States Constitution. The victory parades were suitably sober affairs. On January 16th, the newspaper headlines announced Wheeler's victory. Exactly 1 year from that day, the law would become effective. Congress allowed its citizens a year to close down the saloons, a year to work out the practicalities of transforming America into a dry nation. Incredulous immigrant workers threatened to strike if they were denied a drink. No beer, no work, they warned. The worker strikes of 1919 turned to rioting and damned any hopes of concessions. In the wake of the Russian Revolution, America feared a communist uprising. It was easy for Wheeler to persuade government that making any compromises on the liquor question could be fatal. Wayne Wheeler was the mastermind behind the legislation which defined the details of prohibition. Known as the Volstead Act, the new law banned the manufacture, sale, and transport of intoxicating beverages throughout America. It defined anything with more than 0.5% of alcohol as intoxicating. It had been born in the wheat fields of Kansas. Churchgoers, idealists, men and women who saw America stricken with alcohol. They believed with prohibition they could make America their idyllic world. But prohibition had stirred a hornet's nest. American values meant very different things to its increasingly different people. Prohibition had been attached to so many other moral issues, its vote was never purely on alcohol. Prohibition proved to the world that without the wholehearted support of the people, a totalitarian law is destined to failure. Even as America prepared to go dry, the country was thinking how to break it.
Everybody seems to talk of prohibition and what they'll drink when everything is dry. How are you going to get around this new condition and keep a happy twinkle in your eye? It's very easy now to get a drink, but tell me, did you ever stop and think? How are you going to wet your whistle when the whole darn world goes dry? What are you going to do in the morning when you need a nip to open up your eyes? Now what of the wedding and the christening and the wake when your dear friends die? Oh, are you going to wet your whistle when the whole darn